I should have known something was wrong when Clara spent 45 minutes picking out an outfit for my sister's backyard barbecue. She'd changed 3 times, settling on a tight yellow sundress that screamed, "Look at me," louder than a fire alarm. I watched her apply makeup with the precision of a surgeon, wondering when exactly my wife had started treating family gatherings like auditions. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Martin, are you seriously wearing that? Clara's voice cut through my thoughts as I pulled on my favorite polo shirt, the blue one with the tiny hole near the left pocket that she'd been nagging me to throw away for months. It's clean, I said, not looking up from tying my sneakers. It's embarrassing. She spritzed herself with enough perfume to choke a horse. Lisa's friends will be there. What will they think? What they'd think, I realized later, was that Clara Quinn was a woman who'd married beneath her station and wanted everyone to know it. But at that moment, standing in our bedroom with 15 years of marriage weighing on my shoulders like a lead blanket, I just shrugged. They'll think I'm a high school shop teacher who owns one decent shirt. Clara's reflection in the mirror rolled its eyes. That's exactly the problem. The drive to Lisa's house was a masterclass in passive-aggressive silence. Clara stared out the passenger window, radiating disappointment like heat from asphalt. I focused on the road, mentally preparing myself for 3 hours of watching my wife perform her trapped with a loser routine for an audience. Lisa's backyard was already buzzing with conversation when we arrived. My sister had outdone herself, string lights draped between oak trees, a spread of food that could feed a small army, and enough beer to float a boat. The usual suspects were there: neighbors, co-workers, a handful of Clara's fitness studio friends who always looked at me like I was something they'd scrape off their yoga mats. Martin! Lisa appeared at my elbow with a beer and a knowing smile. Glad you made it. Clara looks... She paused, searching for the right word as we watched my wife air-kiss her way through the crowd. Energetic. That's one word for it. Within 10 minutes, Clara had positioned herself at the center of attention near the pool, regaling Tina and Meg, her closest allies in the war against suburban mediocrity, with some story that required dramatic hand gestures. I caught fragments as I helped Lisa arrange chairs. Completely unreasonable, never listens, stuck in his ways. I'd heard this script before. The stubborn husband who refused to better himself, the man who was content with mediocrity while she had dreams and ambitions. It was Clara's greatest hit, and she performed it whenever she needed sympathy or validation. You know, said a voice beside me, if she spent half as much energy working on her marriage as she does complaining about it, she might actually be happy. I turned to find Julia Scott, our next-door neighbor, holding a glass of wine and wearing an expression of barely concealed disgust. Julia was one of those quietly confident women who didn't need to announce her presence. She just was. A landscape architect who'd moved in 6 months ago and kept to herself mostly. You heard that, huh? Hard not to. She's not exactly whispering. Julia took a sip of wine. For what it's worth, I think your garden looks great. Those raised beds you built? Professional quality. Before I could respond, Clara's voice rose above the general chatter. I swear, sometimes I think I should just put him up for adoption. Anyone want a husband? He comes pre-trained in stubbornness. The group around her laughed. That uncomfortable kind of laughter people make when someone crosses a line, but they're not sure how to react. I felt heat crawl up my neck, that familiar mixture of embarrassment and anger that had become my default emotional state. But then Julia did something unexpected. She stepped forward, wine glass raised like she was making a toast. I'll take him, she announced, loud enough for half the party to hear. So, Martin, what time are you picking me up tomorrow? The backyard went quiet, except for the distant sound of someone's sprinkler system. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Tina and Meg exchanged glances. Even Lisa looked stunned. I stared at Julia for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then something shifted inside me. A door I hadn't realized was locked, suddenly swinging open. 8 sharp, I heard myself say. Wear something green. Julia smiled. A real smile, not the polite social mask most people wore at these things. Perfect. I look great in green. Clara's face had gone through several color changes, settling on an alarming shade of red. That's not funny. Who's joking? Julia's voice was light, conversational. Martin seems like excellent company, much better than some husbands I could mention. The crowd was starting to murmur now, sensing drama. Mrs. Dalrymple from down the street had materialized with the supernatural speed of a professional gossip. Coach Harris from the high school was trying to look anywhere but at Clara's increasingly panicked expression. "This is ridiculous," Clara sputtered. "Martin, tell her what?" I found my voice, and it was steadier than I'd expected. "You just offered me to anyone who'd take me. Julia made an offer. Seems like good business." That's when I saw him, Brent Holloway, Clara's gym manager, emerging from behind Lisa's garage with suspiciously mussed hair and a guilty expression. He'd been at the party for maybe an hour, and I'd lost track of him around the same time Clara had disappeared to help Lisa with something in the kitchen. Our eyes met across the yard. Brent's face went pale, then flushed. He looked like a man who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, if the cookie jar was my wife, and the cookies were... Well, I didn't want to finish that metaphor. "You know what?" I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think I will take Julia up on that offer. Clara, seems like you've got everything handled here." I started walking toward the gate, my heart pounding but my head clearer than it had been in months. Behind me, I heard Clara's voice rising in pitch and volume, trying to regain control of a situation that had already spiraled beyond her reach. "Martin, don't you dare walk away from me. Martin!" Julia fell into step beside me. "My car or yours?" she asked quietly. "Yours. I have a feeling Clara's going to need mine to get home." As we reached Julia's Honda, I glanced back at the party. Clara was surrounded by her friends, gesticulating wildly while Brent hovered nearby, looking like he wanted to disappear into the landscaping. Lisa caught my eye and mouthed, "Call me later," with an expression that was equal parts concerned and impressed. "So," Julia said as we got into her car, "that was either the smartest thing you've ever done or the dumbest. Any idea which?" I buckled my seatbelt and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of an uncertain future. "Ask me tomorrow at 8 sharp." As we drove away, I saw Clara in the side mirror, still standing by the pool in her yellow dress, looking for the first time in our marriage like a woman who'd lost something she couldn't get back. Julia's house was everything mine wasn't: clean lines, thoughtful design, plants that were actually alive. She poured us each a glass of wine and gestured toward her back deck, where we could see the lights from Lisa's party still glowing through the trees. "So," she said, settling into a chair across from me, "how long has this been going on?" "What? Clara's public humiliation routine? Years. Tonight was just the first time anyone called her on it." "No, I meant her and the protein shake enthusiast." I nearly choked on my wine. "What?" Julia's expression was sympathetic but matter-of-fact. "Martin, I live next door. My home office window faces your driveway. I've seen Brent's car there at least a dozen times when your truck wasn't, always during school hours." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though some part of me had already known. The late nights at the gym, the new workout clothes, the way Clara had started showering immediately when she got home, claiming she was too sweaty to touch. "How long?" I asked. "First time I noticed was about 3 months ago. I almost said something, but..." She shrugged. "Wasn't really my place. Until tonight, when she decided to humiliate you in front of half the neighborhood. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. 3 months. While I'd been teaching teenagers how to use power tools safely and planning weekend projects around the house, my wife had been entertaining her personal trainer in our bedroom. "There's more," Julia said gently. "I probably shouldn't show you this, but—" She pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like a group chat. Tina added me to their fitness group a few weeks ago. I was going to leave, but then I saw this. She handed me the phone. The chat was called Fitness Queens and featured Clara, Tina, Meg, and a few other women I recognized from the gym. I scrolled up to a message from Clara, posted 2 days ago. "Finally broken the new equipment at home. Brent knows how to work every muscle group, if you know what I mean." Below that, a string of fire emojis and laughing faces from her friends. Tina had responded, "Girl, you are living. Wish I had a personal trainer making house calls." Meg: "Does Martin know about your new workout routine?" Clara: "What he doesn't know won't hurt him. Besides, someone has to bring some excitement to that house. God knows he never will." I handed the phone back, surprised by how calm I felt. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the relief of finally having confirmation of what I'd suspected for months. The marriage had been over for a long time. I'd just been too stubborn to admit it. "I'm sorry," Julia said. "I know that couldn't have been easy to read." Actually, it was easier than I expected. I took another sip of wine. At least now I know I'm not crazy. Though I have to say, broke in the new equipment is a hell of a way to describe adultery. Julia laughed despite herself. "Your wife has a real gift for euphemism." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the party wind down through the trees. Finally, Julia spoke. "So what are you going to do?" "Honestly, I have no idea. Divorce, obviously. But beyond that," I shrugged. "I've never been the revenge type. Maybe it's time to learn." Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Clara's spent years making you look like the problem. Maybe it's time people saw the real picture." Before I could ask what she meant, my phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Where are you? We need to talk. Now." I showed Julia the message. She raised an eyebrow. "Demanding as always. Are you going to respond?" "Eventually." I turned off the phone and slipped it into my pocket. "But not tonight. Tonight I'm going to sleep on your couch and pretend I'm a man whose wife didn't just announce to the neighborhood that she's shopping him around like a used car. You can take the guest room. And Martin?" Julia's voice was soft. "For what it's worth, I meant what I said back there. You do seem like excellent company." I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While Julia made coffee, I called my lawyer, a guy named Pete Morrison, who'd handled my sister's divorce 2 years earlier. Pete was the kind of attorney who looked like a small-town insurance salesman, but had the instincts of a shark. "Martin Quinn," Pete said when I explained the situation. "Heard you had quite the evening at Lisa's party. News travels fast around here. That's what I'm counting on. Pete, I need to file for divorce, today if possible." That eager to get started? That eager to control the narrative? Clara's been painting me as the problem for years. Time to show people who's really been driving this marriage into the ground. Pete was quiet for a moment. "You know, there's something to be said for filing first. Shows initiative. And if you've got proof of adultery, I've got proof. Even better. Come in this afternoon. We'll get the paperwork started." After I hung up, Julia handed me a cup of coffee and a piece of toast. "Feel better?" "Getting there. Though I should probably go home and face the music at some point." "Or," Julia said, "you could let the music come to you." She nodded toward the window. Clara's car was pulling into my driveway, and she was moving like a woman on a mission. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the sharp, angry movements as she got out of the car and marched toward the front door. She looks upset, Julia observed mildly. She looks like a woman who's realized she might have overplayed her hand. We watched Clara pound on the front door, then try her key. When it didn't work, I'd had Lisa change the locks that morning while Clara was at her early yoga class. She stood back and put her hands on her hips in a pose I'd seen 1,000 times. The "how dare you defy me" stance. My phone started ringing. Clara's number. "Answer it," Julia said. "Put it on speaker." I hesitated, then accepted the call. "Hello, Clara." "Where the hell are you?" Her voice was shrill with panic and rage. "And why don't my keys work?" "I'm having coffee with a friend, and the locks have been changed for security reasons." "Security reasons? Martin, this is ridiculous. We need to talk about last night. I was just joking around, you know that." "Were you joking when you were texting your fitness group about breaking in new equipment?" The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Clara's voice came back, smaller and more careful. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. Clara, I'm filing for divorce today. You can have your lawyer contact Pete Morrison." "Martin, you can't be serious. Over a stupid joke?" "Over 3 months of adultery. Over years of public humiliation. Over the fact that you've made it clear you don't want to be married to me. I'm just making it official." Another long pause. When Clara spoke again, her voice had shifted from panic to calculation. "Fine. But don't think this is going to be easy for you. I know things, Martin, about your finances, about that time you—" I hung up and turned off the phone. Julia was looking at me with something that might have been admiration. "That felt good, didn't it?" "Better than I expected." I took a sip of coffee and realized my hands were steady. Though I have a feeling things are about to get interesting. "Oh, they are," Julia said with a smile that was equal parts sympathetic and mischievous. "Trust me on that." The town's Saturday morning farmers' market was Clara's natural habitat, a place where she could see and be seen, where gossip flowed as freely as the free coffee samples at the organic roaster's booth. Which is exactly why Julia and I decided to make our public debut there. "You sure about this?" I asked as we walked hand in hand down Main Street. It felt strange, walking with a woman who wasn't Clara, but also surprisingly natural. "Absolutely. Clara spent years making you look like the problem. Time to show people what a man looks like when he's actually happy." We'd planned this carefully. Julia wore a green sundress, honoring my comment from the night before, and I'd traded my usual weekend uniform of old jeans and a work shirt for khakis and a button-down that actually fit. We looked like a couple, which was exactly the point. The market was in full swing when we arrived. Local vendors hawked everything from organic vegetables to handmade soaps, while families wandered between booths with their reusable shopping bags and good intentions. It was the kind of wholesome small-town scene that Clara loved to be part of, especially when she could use it as a backdrop for her various performances. We didn't have to wait long to spot her. Clara was holding court near the flower vendor, surrounded by her usual audience of fitness studio friends and neighborhood wives. She was wearing white, a calculated choice that screamed innocence and virtue, and gesturing animatedly as she told what I could only assume was her version of last night's events. "There she is," Julia murmured. "Ready for this? Let's do it." We approached slowly, stopping at the vegetable stand directly across from Clara's group. I could feel eyes on us, the subtle shift in attention that happens when small-town drama is about to unfold in public. Mrs. Dalrymple was practically vibrating with anticipation. "Martin!" Clara's voice cut across the market chatter. She'd spotted us and was striding over with the determined gait of a woman on a mission. "We need to talk. Now!" "Hello, Clara." I kept my voice pleasant, conversational. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" "Don't play games with me, this—" She gestured between Julia and me. "This is ridiculous. You're embarrassing yourself." Julia stepped closer to me, a subtle but unmistakable claiming of territory. I think he looks pretty good, actually. Much better than he did last night. Clara's face flushed. This is none of your business. Actually, Julia said with a smile that could cut glass, when you publicly offer someone's husband to anyone who'll take him, it kind of becomes everyone's business. A small crowd was gathering now, pretending to shop while obviously listening to every word. I recognized faces from the high school, from the neighborhood, from various community events over the years. These were the people who'd watched Clara perform her suffering wife routine at dozens of gatherings. I was joking, Clara said, her voice rising. It was a joke, Martin. You know that. Was Brent part of the joke too? I asked quietly. Clara went very still. What are you talking about? 3 months, Clara. 3 months of house calls while I was at work. That's a pretty elaborate setup for a joke. The crowd was no longer pretending to shop. Mrs. Dalrymple had actually moved closer, her shopping basket forgotten. Even the vegetable vendor had stopped arranging his tomatoes. You don't know what you're talking about, Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Don't I? I pulled out my phone and opened the screenshots Julia had sent me of the fitness group chat. Should I read some of your messages about breaking in new equipment? Or maybe the one about bringing excitement to our house? Clara's face went white, then red, then white again. You went through my private messages? Actually, Julia said cheerfully, you added me to that group chat, remember? I didn't go looking for anything. You just shared it with me. The crowd was murmuring now, pieces of gossip being exchanged in whispered conversations. I could see the story spreading in real time, Clara's public humiliation of her husband, the revelation of her affair, the dramatic reversal of fortune. This is insane, Clara said, looking around at the faces surrounding us. You're all acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Marriage is complicated. Sometimes people drift apart. Drift apart, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? That's when Brent appeared, emerging from the coffee stand with 2 cups and an expression of dawning horror as he realized what he was walking into. He stopped about 10 feet away, clearly debating whether to approach or flee. Brent! Julia called out with false cheer. Perfect timing! We were just talking about equipment maintenance. Brent looked like a deer caught in headlights. The crowd turned to stare at him, and I could practically see the connections being made in real time. The gym manager, Clara's personal trainer, the other man. I should go, Brent mumbled, backing away. Why? I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Don't you want to discuss Clara's workout routine? I hear you've been very hands-on with her training. Brent's face went red. He set down the coffee cups and started walking quickly toward the parking lot. Clara watched him go with an expression of pure panic. This is harassment, she said, but her voice was shaky now. I don't have to stand here and listen to this. You're right, I said. You don't. But I thought you might want to know. I filed for divorce yesterday. Pete Morrison will be in touch with your lawyer. The crowd went completely silent. In small-town terms, this was the equivalent of dropping a bomb. Divorces happened, of course, but they were usually handled quietly, privately. Public announcements at the farmers' market were reserved for truly spectacular relationship failures. Clara stared at me for a long moment, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally, she found her voice. Fine, she said, trying to regain some dignity. Fine, but don't think this makes you look good, Martin. Everyone knows what you're really like. Stubborn. Impossible to live with. I tried for 15 years to make that marriage work. And I tried for 15 years to be enough for you, I replied. Guess we both failed. Clara turned and walked away, her white dress bright against the morning shadows. Her friends followed at a distance, unsure whether to offer support or distance themselves from the scandal. As the crowd began to disperse, Julia squeezed my hand. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it for a moment, watching Clara's retreating figure. Free, I said finally. For the first time in years. I feel completely free. Mrs. Dalrymple approached us with the purposeful stride of a woman on a gossip mission. "Martin, dear," she said, "I just want you to know that some of us have seen what's been going on. That woman never appreciated what she had." "Thank you, Mrs. Dalrymple. And Julia," she continued, "you're a lovely girl. Much better suited for our Martin than that. Well, I won't say what I really think." As she walked away, Julia laughed. "I think you just got the Mrs. Dalrymple seal of approval. That's like being endorsed by the town newspaper." "Better," I said. "Mrs. Dalrymple reaches more people and they actually believe what she says." We finished our shopping in a bubble of whispered conversations and sympathetic glances. By the time we left the market, I knew the story would be all over town within hours. Clara's carefully constructed image as the long-suffering wife was crumbling in real time, replaced by the truth. She was a woman who'd cheated on her husband and then tried to publicly humiliate him when he called her on it. "So," Julia said as we loaded our purchases into her car, "what's next?" I thought about Clara's parting shot, her threat about knowing things about my finances. I thought about Brent's panicked retreat and the way Clara's friends had distanced themselves from her at the first sign of real scandal. "Next," I said, "we make sure this story gets told the right way. Clara's had 15 years to control the narrative. Time to give someone else a turn." Julia smiled. "I like the way you think. And Martin, for what it's worth, I think you're handling this perfectly." As we drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of standing up for myself. Clara had spent so long making me feel like the problem that I'd almost started to believe it. But watching her crumble under the weight of her own actions, seeing the crowd's sympathy shift from her to me, I realized something important. I wasn't the problem. I never had been. I was just a man who'd been too stubborn to give up on a marriage that had been over for years. But I wasn't too stubborn to learn from my mistakes. By Monday morning, the story had taken on a life of its own. I arrived at Jefferson High to find my students buzzing with barely contained gossip. Apparently, several of them had part-time jobs at the market and had witnessed Saturday's showdown firsthand. "Mr. Quinn," said Jessica Torres, one of my more outspoken seniors, "my mom says you're getting divorced." "Your mom's well informed," I replied, setting up the day's lesson on mortise and tenon joints. "But let's focus on woodworking, not gossip." "Is it true your wife was cheating with that guy from the gym?" asked Tyler Brooks, clearly enjoying the drama. I paused, considering how to handle this. These kids had known me for years. Some of them had been in my classes since they were freshmen. They deserved honesty, within reason. "Tyler, relationships are complicated. Sometimes they don't work out, and when that happens, it's best to handle it with dignity and move on." "But she was cheating, right?" Jessica pressed. "Because my mom saw them together at the Riverside Motel last month." That was news to me, and from the way the other students perked up, it was news to them too. The Riverside Motel was a rundown place on the edge of town, the kind of establishment that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. "Jessica," I said carefully, "maybe we should—" "My dad saw them too," interrupted Marcus Chen, another senior. "He delivers supplies there for his plumbing business. Said they were there at least 3 times. I felt a familiar anger building in my chest, but also something else. Vindication. If Clara and Brent had been stupid enough to conduct their affair at a local motel where half the town could see them, they'd handed me even more ammunition. "All right, everyone," I said, clapping my hands together. "Enough gossip. Let's talk about something more interesting than my personal life, like how to cut a perfect mortise without splitting the wood." But as the day wore on, I found myself thinking about what Jessica had said. The Riverside Motel, 3 separate sightings. Clara had been taking risks, getting sloppy. Maybe she'd wanted to get caught. Maybe this whole mess was her way of forcing an end to our marriage without having to take responsibility for it. After school, I drove to Pete Morrison's office to discuss strategy. Pete was a small man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, but his reputation for aggressive divorce tactics was legendary in our county. "Martin," he said, gesturing for me to sit down, "I've been doing some research on your situation. Your wife hired Sandra Chen, Marcus's aunt, actually. Good lawyer, but she's got a reputation for playing dirty." "What kind of dirty?" "The kind where she digs up every embarrassing detail about your life and uses it to make you look bad in court. Sandra's going to try to paint you as an unreasonable husband who drove his wife into another man's arms." I laughed, surprising myself. Good luck with that. Half the town watched Clara humiliate me at a public barbecue. That helps, but Sandra's smart. She'll find another angle. My advice? We need to stay ahead of her. Control the story before she can spin it. What do you have in mind? Pete leaned back in his chair. How do you feel about private investigators? An hour later, I was sitting in my truck outside the Riverside Motel with a man named Eddie Kowalski, a former police detective who now made his living documenting other people's indiscretions. Eddie was everything you'd expect from a small-town PI: rumpled clothes, 5 o'clock shadow, and the kind of cynical worldview that came from seeing too much human weakness. "Your wife and her boyfriend have been regulars here," Eddie said, flipping through a notebook. "Usually Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Always pay cash, always use the same room. Number 12, around back where the cars aren't visible from the road." "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been watching them for 3 weeks. Your neighbor Julia hired me right after she saw them together the first time. She wanted to have evidence ready in case you ever decided to do something about it." I stared at him. "Julia hired you?" "Smart woman. Said she could see which way things were heading and wanted to make sure you had options." Eddie pulled out a manila envelope. "Photos, credit card records, witness statements from motel staff, everything you need to prove adultery." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. The photos were explicit enough to leave no doubt about what Clara and Brent had been doing, but clinical enough to be admissible in court. There were timestamps, license plate numbers, even receipts from the motel's front desk. "This is—" I struggled for words. "Thorough," Eddie finished. "Like I said, your neighbor's a smart woman. She knew you'd need more than just suspicions." That evening, I sat in Julia's kitchen while she made dinner, the envelope of evidence spread across her table like a hand of cards in a high-stakes poker game. "You've been planning this for weeks," I said. "I've been preparing for possibilities," she corrected. "There's a difference. I saw what Clara was doing to you, and I saw what she was doing behind your back. I wanted to make sure you had choices." "Why? We barely knew each other." Julia was quiet for a long moment, stirring something that smelled amazing on the stove. Finally, she turned to face me. "Because I was married to someone like Clara once, someone who made me feel small and worthless while they did whatever they wanted behind my back. And when I finally got the courage to leave, I had nothing. No proof, no evidence, just my word against his. He cleaned out our bank accounts and left me with nothing but debt and a reputation as a bitter ex-wife who couldn't handle the truth. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be smart. Clara's going to try to destroy you in this divorce. She's going to claim you were controlling, unreasonable, maybe even abusive. She's going to say the affair was your fault because you weren't meeting her needs. And if you don't have evidence to counter that narrative, she might succeed." I looked down at the photos again. This feels like overkill. This feels like insurance. Martin, Clara spent years making you doubt yourself. Don't let her do it again now. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Clara, we need to talk. Tonight. It's important." I showed Julia the message. She raised an eyebrow. "Interesting timing. Think she knows about the photos?" "Only one way to find out." I texted back. "Meet me at the house in an hour." Clara was already there when I arrived, pacing back and forth on the front porch like a caged animal. She'd traded her usual fitness attire for jeans and a sweater, A calculated choice designed to make her look vulnerable and approachable. Martin, thank God. We need to fix this. All of this. She gestured vaguely at the house, at me, at the situation in general. I know you're angry and you have every right to be, but we can work through this. Work through what exactly? The marriage, our problems. I know I made mistakes, but… Mistakes? I pulled out my phone and showed her one of Eddie's photos. Is this what you call a mistake? Clara's face went white, then red, then white again. Where did you get that? Does it matter? The question is, how many more are there? She stared at the photo for a long moment, and I watched something change in her expression. The panic was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Calculation. Fine, she said finally. Yes, I had an affair. But you drove me to it, Martin. Years of your stubbornness, your refusal to grow or change or be the man I needed. What was I supposed to do? Not cheat on me would have been a good start. Easy for you to say. You were perfectly happy with your little routine. Work, home, weekend projects. No ambition, no passion, no desire for anything more than mediocrity. Do you have any idea how soul-crushing that is for someone with dreams? I felt the familiar anger building, but this time it was different, cleaner, focused. What dreams, Clara? Your dream of humiliating me at public events? Your dream of screwing your personal trainer in cheap motels? Your dream of making me feel like a failure for 15 years? That's exactly what it was. You made a choice, Clara. You chose to cheat instead of talking to me. You chose to mock me in public instead of working on our problems. You chose Brent over our marriage. Own it. Clara's mask slipped completely then, revealing the anger and resentment that had been building for years. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. I settled for you, Martin. I was young and stupid, and I thought you'd grow into something more than a small-town shop teacher with no ambition. But you didn't. You stayed exactly the same boring, stubborn man I married, and I wasted 15 years waiting for you to become someone worth staying with. The words should have hurt. A month ago, they would have devastated me. But standing there with evidence of her betrayal in my pocket and Julia's support behind me, they just sounded like the desperate attacks of a woman who'd lost control of her own narrative. You know what, Clara? You're right. I am stubborn. I'm stubborn enough to stay faithful to my wife, even when she made it clear she didn't want me. I'm stubborn enough to keep trying to make a marriage work even when my partner had checked out years ago. And I'm stubborn enough to make sure everyone knows exactly who ended this marriage and why. I turned and started walking toward my truck. Where are you going? Clara called after me. To file these photos with my lawyer. Sleep well, Clara. Tomorrow's going to be a very interesting day. As I drove away, I saw her in my rearview mirror, standing alone on the porch of a house she'd never live in again, finally understanding that her years of manipulation and control were over. The stubborn husband had finally learned to fight back. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to my classroom. Sandra Chen, Clara's lawyer, appeared during my prep period with the kind of smile that promised trouble. Mr. Quinn, she said, settling into a student desk that was clearly too small for her. I was hoping we could have a conversation before this divorce gets too contentious. I'm listening. My client is willing to be reasonable. She understands that the marriage is over and she's prepared to make this as painless as possible for both of you. All she wants is her fair share of the marital assets and the opportunity to move on with her life. I set down the lesson plans I'd been grading. And what exactly does she consider her fair share? Half the house, half your retirement account, and spousal support for 5 years while she gets back on her feet. Very standard for a 15-year marriage. What about her affair? Sandra's smile never wavered. What affair? I'm not aware of any proof of infidelity. Are you? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out one of Eddie's photos. Sandra's smile faltered slightly. Where did you get this? Private investigator. There are dozens more, along with witness statements and credit card records. Your client's been conducting her affair at the Riverside Motel for months. Sandra studied the photo with the professional detachment of someone who'd seen worse. This proves nothing, except that my client was in a motel room with a friend. Hardly grounds for denying her what she's entitled to. A friend she was having closeness with while married to me? That's your interpretation. Clara's interpretation is that she sought comfort from a friend during a difficult period in her marriage. A period made difficult by your controlling and emotionally abusive behavior. I laughed, surprising both of us. Emotionally abusive? Sandra, half the town watched your client publicly humiliate me at a barbecue. If anyone's been emotionally abusive, it's her. That's not how Clara remembers it. She remembers 15 years of walking on eggshells around a man who refused to grow or change, who stifled her dreams and ambitions, who made her feel trapped in a life she never wanted. And she remembers wrong. Sandra leaned forward, her voice taking on a harder edge. Mr. Quinn, let me be very clear about something. This can go easy or it can go hard. If it goes easy, Clara gets her fair share and you both move on with your lives. If it goes hard, we dig into every aspect of your marriage. Every argument, every disappointment, every moment when you failed to be the husband she needed. We put your students on the stand to testify about your temper. We bring in Clara's friends to talk about the bruises. What bruises? The emotional bruises, Mr. Quinn. The damage you did to her self-esteem over 15 years of marriage. And if we need to, we can talk about physical bruises too. Clara's been documenting incidents for years. The threat was clear, and it was ugly. Sandra was prepared to fabricate evidence of domestic violence if necessary. In a he said, she said situation, Clara's word might be enough to destroy my reputation and my career. But Sandra had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was the same man Clara had been manipulating for 15 years. The man who would back down rather than fight, who would accept blame to avoid conflict. Sandra, I said quietly, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. I pulled out my phone and played a recording I'd made the night before. Clara's voice, clear and unmistakable, admitting to the affair and blaming me for driving her to it. That's just the beginning, I continued. I have photos, witness statements, credit card records, and testimony from half the town about Clara's public behavior. I have records of her group chat messages bragging about her affair. I have motel receipts and testimony from staff who remember them as regular customers. Sandra's professional composure was starting to crack. More importantly, I continued, I have 15 years of teaching evaluations that describe me as patient, kind, and supportive. I have character references from colleagues, parents, and students. I have bank records showing that I never controlled Clara's spending or access to money. And I have a town full of people who watched her humiliate me in public for years. I leaned back in my chair. So here's my counteroffer. Clara gets nothing except her personal belongings. No house, no retirement money, no spousal support. In exchange, I don't release the photos to the local newspaper or post them on social media. I don't press charges for adultery in a state that still recognizes it as grounds for divorce. And I don't file a countersuit for emotional distress. Sandra stared at me for a long moment. You can't be serious. I'm very serious. Clara made a choice when she decided to cheat on me, and then try to destroy my reputation. Now she gets to live with the consequences. She'll never agree to that. Then she can explain to a judge why she was having closeness with another man in a motel room while married to me. She can explain why she publicly humiliated her husband at social events. She can explain why she thinks she deserves half of everything after betraying our marriage. Sandra gathered her papers and stood up. This isn't over, Mr. Quinn. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. After she left, I sat in my empty classroom for a long time, thinking about how much had changed in just a few days. A week ago, I'd been a man who accepted blame for everything wrong in his marriage. Now I was someone who fought back. That afternoon, I got a call from Pete Morrison. "Martin, we need to talk. Sandra Chen just left my office, and she's not happy." "What did she say?" "She's threatening to go nuclear. Claims of abuse, financial control, the whole playbook. But here's the thing. I think she's bluffing. If they had real evidence, they would have led with it, not saved it for threats." "So, what's our move?" "We call their bluff. I'm filing a motion to release all evidence in the case to the public record. Photos, witness statements, everything. Let's see how comfortable Clara is with the whole town seeing exactly what kind of woman she really is." That evening, Julia and I sat on her deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The envelope of photos sat on the table between us like a loaded gun. "How are you feeling about all this?" Julia asked. "Honestly, better than I have in years. For the first time in my marriage, I'm not the one apologizing or backing down or trying to keep the peace." "And how does that feel?" "Terrifying, liberating." "Right." I took a sip of beer and thought about Sandra's threats, about Clara's desperation, about the choice I was making to fight instead of fold. I spent 15 years being the man Clara wanted me to be, accommodating, forgiving, willing to take responsibility for her happiness. It never worked. Maybe it's time to try being myself. And who is that exactly? I considered the question. A stubborn man who doesn't give up easily, who stands up for himself when pushed too far, who's tired of being everyone else's problem. Julia smiled. "I like him already." My phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Please call me. We can work this out." I showed Julia the message. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to respond?" "Eventually, but not tonight. Tonight I'm going to have dinner with a beautiful woman and pretend I'm a man whose biggest problem is deciding what to watch on Netflix." "That can be arranged?" As we went inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The quiet satisfaction of being exactly where I wanted to be, with exactly who I wanted to be with, living exactly the life I chose. Clara had spent years trying to change me into someone else. But maybe the problem was never that I was too stubborn to change. Maybe the problem was that I was changing into someone she couldn't control, and maybe that was exactly who I was supposed to be. The call came at 6 in the morning. Pete Morrison's voice was tight with controlled excitement. "Martin, you need to get down here now. Clara's lawyer wants to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "The kind where your wife gets nothing and disappears quietly. Apparently someone leaked those photos to the Riverside Motel's management, and they've fired Brent for conducting personal business on their property. Clara's panicking." I was dressed and out the door in 10 minutes. Julia met me at her car, already dressed and holding 2 cups of coffee. "How did you know?" I asked. "I've been through this before, remember? When someone's world is falling apart, they always try to make a deal at the last minute." Pete's office was buzzing with activity when we arrived. Sandra Chen sat across from Pete's desk, looking like a woman who'd been up all night. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Martin," Pete said as we entered, "Sandra has a proposal." "I'm listening." Sandra cleared her throat. "My client is prepared to accept a very modest settlement. Her personal belongings, her car, and a small amount of cash to help her relocate. In exchange, she'll sign a non-disclosure agreement and move out of state within 30 days. "How small an amount of cash?" $5,000. I looked at Pete, who was trying not to smile. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Sandra said quickly. "Clara just wants to put this behind her and start fresh somewhere else." "Where's Clara now?" Sandra hesitated. "She's staying with friends." "Which friends?" "That's not really relevant to—" "Tina kicked her out," Julia said quietly. "I saw Clara loading suitcases into her car at Tina's house this morning. Looked like she was crying." Sandra's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the exhaustion underneath. "My client has been under tremendous stress. The public nature of this situation has made it difficult for her to maintain her normal support network." Translation. Clara's friends had abandoned her once the full scope of her affair became public knowledge. The same women who'd laughed at her jokes about her stubborn husband were now distancing themselves from a woman who'd been caught cheating in such a public and humiliating way. "I'll take the deal," I said, with one modification. "What modification?" "No money. Clara gets her personal belongings and her car. That's it. And the non-disclosure agreement works both ways. She doesn't talk about our marriage, and I don't release any more evidence about her affair." Sandra started to object, but I held up a hand. "That's the deal. Take it or leave it, because if we go to court, Clara's going to have to explain those photos to a judge, and I'm going to make sure every detail of her affair becomes part of the public record." Sandra looked like she wanted to argue, but she was smart enough to recognize when her client was out of options. "I'll need to discuss this with Clara." "You have 1 hour," Pete said. "After that, we proceed with the original filing." While we waited, Julia and I walked to the coffee shop down the street. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made you believe in new beginnings. "So," Julia said as we found a table by the window, "what happens after this is over?" "Honestly, I have no idea. For the first time in 15 years, I get to figure out what I want instead of trying to be what someone else needs." "And what do you think you want?" I looked at her across the table. This woman who'd stood up for me when no one else would, who'd helped me find the courage to fight for myself, who'd shown me what it felt like to be valued instead of tolerated. "I think I want to find out what happens when a stubborn man stops trying to change and starts appreciating what he has." Julia smiled. "That sounds like a good plan." My phone rang. "Pete." "She took the deal," he said. "Clara signed everything. She'll be out of the house by this afternoon and out of the state by the end of the month." "Just like that?" "Just like that. Turns out Brent dumped her yesterday. Apparently he's not interested in women who come with public scandal and no money. Clara's got nothing left to fight with." After we hung up, I sat in the coffee shop for a long time, processing what had just happened. 15 years of marriage ended with a signature on a legal document. Clara would disappear from my life as suddenly as she'd tried to destroy it. "How do you feel?" Julia asked. "Free," I said, and realized it was completely true. For the first time in years, I feel completely free. That afternoon, I stood in my driveway and watched Clara load the last of her belongings into her car. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her choices. When she finished, she walked over to where I was standing. "Martin," she said quietly, "I want you to know that I never meant for things to end this way." "How did you mean for them to end?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I thought you'd change. I thought if I pushed hard enough, you'd become someone different." "I did change, Clara. Just not the way you wanted." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something like recognition in her eyes. "You're not going to forgive me, are you?" "I'm not going to forget what you did, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life angry about it either. You made your choices, and now you get to live with them." Clara nodded and got into her car. As she drove away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. She'd thrown away 15 years of marriage for a man who'd abandoned her the moment things got difficult. She'd lost her friends, her home, and her reputation for a few months of excitement that had cost her everything. Julia appeared at my side as Clara's car disappeared around the corner. "Any regrets?" she asked. "About the divorce? No. About the marriage?" I thought about it for a moment. "I regret that I spent so many years trying to be someone I wasn't. But I don't regret learning who I really am." "And who is that?" I put my arm around her and looked at the house that was now truly mine, in a town where people had finally seen the real story instead of Clara's carefully crafted fiction. "A stubborn man who doesn't give up easily," I said, "but who's finally learned the difference between fighting for something worth saving and fighting for something that was never really there. 6 months later, Julia and I were married in a small ceremony in my backyard. The guest list included Lisa, Mrs. Dalrymple, my students, and half the town. Pete Morrison officiated, and Eddie Kowalski took the photos. As we danced to our first song as husband and wife, Julia whispered in my ear, "So, Mr. Quinn, any plans to change now that you're married again?" I laughed and spun her around, feeling lighter and happier than I had in years. "Not a chance," I said. "I'm too stubborn for that." And for the first time in my life, being stubborn felt like exactly the right thing to be.